Hello and welcome to your day 11 of the Android application development course. Today we'll be merging the open source alliance, that is, we have learned the complete Android part, we know the complete PHP part. Now we'll be merging the two to create a connected application, an application which will be connected with all the cell phones on which it will be developed. So let's start. First of all, let's see how does Android interact with the World Wide Web. Android has built-in internet capabilities which can be used by any application. So if your applications wants to interact with the internet, you can do that with the help of Android. Every Android device is an HTTP client. Okay, because we'll be sending requests to a server, so each device will be an HTTP client. The following classes will help us to interact with the World Wide Web. The first class that we'll be using will be the HTTP client. HTTP client is a Android class which will be used to execute web requests on the server. Then we'll have a HTTP get class. The HTTP get class will be allowing us to create a get request. If you want to create a post request, you have a HTTP post class. Once you have got the HTTP client, you have made the HTTP request, then you can send this request, you will get the response back. You have to collect this response in the HTTP response class object. So this will get you the response sent by the server. Then you have to parse this response, means that response will contain headers, the data, etc. Out of that, you want the complete body of your application or of your PHP code. That body will be extracted with the help of the HTTP entity class. To read this HTTP entity class output, you will be requiring a buffered reader. The HTTP entity class will give you an output of n number of bytes. You don't know what this n is. That is why you will be using a buffered reader. That buffered reader will be reading all the information sent by the HTTP entity. Okay, so let's revise. What are the 5 classes? The first class is the HTTP client. HTTP client will allow us to create a request on a browser on our cell phone. Then we have HTTP get. HTTP get will allow us to create a get request and send that get request to the server. From the server we'll get a response. That response will be given to us with the help of HTTP response. This HTTP response will contain headers, the data and the tail of the HTML part. Out of that we want just the data, so we'll extract that data with the help of the HTTP entity class. The HTTP entity class will give me n number of bytes. If I want to read all those n number of bytes, I'll be using a buffered reader class. That buffered reader class will help me to read the complete data given by the HTTP client. So far so good. So let's see. Each HTTP request which we send from the Android device must target a PHP page. For example, if I want to insert a record, so I should have an insert.php file. If I want to update a record, I should have an update.php file. All these files will be doing a single job, that is insert.php will just perform an operation of inserting to database and so on. The output of the PHP page must be passed inside our activity. For example, if we have a select request, that select request will get us all the records separated by a comma. So in our code, we'll be getting this response and we'll be splitting this response with the help of a comma, and all the records which we get, we will display those records inside our Android activity. So we need to create a different PHP page for each function that we need to execute on the server side. So we'll have a different PHP page for insert, for update, for delete, for select, etc. Now the task of executing the request of HTTP is very repetitive. That is, you'll be always having the HTTP client, always the get request, always the HTTP response, always the entity, always the buffered reader. So why not create a function? That function will perform this task repetitively as and when we call the function. So let's see how our model of Android interaction works. This is a PHP server that has been hosted at http://localhost. This is our Android device. We'll be sending a get request from our Android device, and the PHP server will give us a text-based response. And this text-based response has to be parsed inside our activity. Before starting with the development, let's look at some facts. Our PHP website is hosted at this address, that is http://localhost. The Android emulator can reach this address with the URL http://10.0.2.2. Whenever you say 10.0.2.2, this indicates the host, which is the host of the device, the host's IP address, that is 10.0.2.2. Whenever we'll be launching our emulator and we'll be going to the browser and we'll be typing in this address, then the browser will redirect our request to the local host of the hosting device. In our case, on the emulator, the hosting device is the PC. So 10.0.2.2 will get the request to the PC's local host. For example, if a sample web browser GET request is something like this: localhost sample.php, txt message equals to hello, and txt age equals to 23, then this request on the Android device will be http 10.0.2.2. So this is the localhost address for our Android device, /sample.php, then txt message and txt age. Okay, so wherever you're using localhost, you have to just replace that by 10.0.2.2. Thus, in the case of Android, we'll be required to create artificial GET request from the Android code to access the PHP server hosted on our machine. For example, on the HTML browser, we have the controls for message and age, correct? Whenever we click on submit button, these variables get generated automatically and these variables are passed on to the browser automatically. But whenever we will be doing programming with Android, in that case, we will not be having a web form. We will be having an application form. From that application form, we have to create such a request artificially and we have to pass in these variables artificially. Means even if we don't have a txt message edit text on our device and we want to send a message to the PHP file, then we have to create a request which says http://10.0.2.2 sample.php txt message equals to and the text that we get from the txt message. Okay, so for now just understand that we'll be requiring to create an artificial GET request. That GET request has to be sent from the Android device to the PHP server. So let's see how do we extend the student demo on Android. We have created the sample student MySQL database in PHP that we did in the last lecture. We would now extend that functionality to Android. To create a web-enabled Android application, we must follow the given steps. The first step is that we must create the MySQL database. We already have the MySQL database in picture, but whenever you will be creating a new project, at that time you have to create a MySQL database. Then we have to create the PHP codes to access the MySQL database. In our case, we only have the index.php file. We have to create a file for insert.php, update.php, delete.php and select.php. Then we'll create the Android application with internet permissions. That is, whenever we'll be having an application of Android that will be requiring to connect to the PHP server, so that application must have the internet permissions available with it. Then we'll call the PHP codes from our Android application. And this calling has to be done with the help of the 5 classes that we saw, that is the HTTP client, the HTTP GET, the HTTP request and the HTTP entity classes, and then we'll have the buffer reader to read the response from the HTTP entity. So far so good. So let's start. First step is to create the MySQL database. We have already done that in the previous slides. Now we'll be doing the second step, that is to create the PHP codes to access the MySQL database. Let's write the PHP code. We need the PHP code for inserting a record, updating a record, deleting a record and selecting all records. So these would be created as get request with the file names insert.php, update.php, delete.php and select all.php. Let's start with the first file, that is insert.php. We'll have the PHP tag. We'll check if all the get variables are set. That is, if we have set the txt name, txt age, txt address, txt contact and txt other information. You have to appreciate the fact that this request will come from an Android device. So the Android device will not have an inbuilt get request. It has to create an artificial get request. So from the Android device, we have to pass with the URL txt name, txt age, txt address, txt contact and txt other information. This has to be passed from the Android device to the insert.php file. So if everything is set, then we will first include the PHP MySQL library by saying include once MySQL library.php. Then we will get the name, the age, the address, the contact and the other information. And we'll have the insert query. The insert query is very simple. We'll say insert into the table name, all the fields and all the values. Once that's done, then we'll have a MySQL start. The MySQL start will actually start the connection from your PHP code to the MySQL database. Then you will say execute query. The query will be executed on the MySQL database and you will check if the result is not -1. Then you will echo that everything was inserted properly, else you will echo cannot insert to database. Then close the connection and close the PHP code. Now whenever you will say echo over here, echo is directly displayed on the client's browser. But in our case, the client is the Android device. So this statement inserted successfully will come on the Android device and we have to display that statement to the user. So whatever information you will put inside this echo will be displayed on the Android device directly. Similarly, we'll have the update.php file. We'll check if all the variables are set. If all the variables are set, we'll include the MySQL library and we will get the ID, name, age, address, contact, other information. Over here, we have to see that we have taken the ID as well, because for updation we'll be requiring the ID. Then we'll have the update request. We'll have the request as update table, set the name, the age, the address, contact, other information, where ID equals to ID. Name has to be done in single quotes because it is a string. Age can be done directly because it is an integer. Address again single quote, contact single quote, other information single quote, where the ID equals to $ID. Once this is done, then we can start the connection and we can insert the result, that is we can execute the update query on the database. We'll check if the result is not -1, then we will echo that it was updated successfully, else cannot update the database. This is similar to the previous example of insert.php, but over here we are just executing the update query in place of insert query. Then we'll have the code for deletion. Deletion code is very simple. We have to just check if the ID was set. If the ID is set, we'll include the MySQL library. We'll get the ID. We'll get the query, that is delete from the table where ID equals to ID. We'll start the MySQL connection. We'll execute the query on database and we'll check if the result was not -1. We'll say deleted successfully, else we'll say cannot delete from database and we'll close the PHP code. I hope this is very simple and clear to you. Once that is done, then we'll have a code for selecting all the records from database. Before starting with the code, let us understand some small concepts over here. Whenever we'll be selecting all the records, we'll be getting all the information like the ID, the name, the age, the other information, etc. All this information has to be separated by a separator. In our case, that separator will be a comma. One record and second record will also need to be separated. One record and second record will be separated by a separator EOR. We'll attach a string at the end of every record saying EOR. EOR indicates end of record. This string is not fixed. Depending upon your application need, you can change this string to EOR, to $123, etc. Whenever you will be getting this response onto the Android device, you will be splitting this response with the help of EOR. That will give you an array of all the entries separated by a comma. For example, if I have 3 records and I have just the ID and the name, if the ID of the first record is 1 and the name is Ashwin, if the ID of the second record is 2 and the name is Pankaj, if the ID of the third record is 3 and the name is Sagar, then we will have 1, Ashwin, EOR, 2, Pankaj, EOR, 3, Sagar, EOR. Whenever we'll be getting this response on the Android device, we'll be first splitting this response with the help of the EOR, because we have given an EOR at the end of every record. This will give me 3 array entries, that is 1, Ashwin, 2, Pankaj, 3, Sagar. I can directly put these entries inside the list view on the Android device. Then whenever someone clicks on one of these entries on the list view, I can separate those entries by a comma, and then I can fill the form with the help of those entries. I hope that much theory is clear to you. With that knowledge, let's begin coding the selectall.php file. We have the PHP tag. We'll say include once MySQL library, and we'll fetch all the results. To fetch the results, we'll have a select query, select star from TBL personal information. We'll start the connection. We'll get the results in the form of an array. So we'll have result equals to search database and the query, and the second argument is not required over here. The second argument says how many fields I want. I want all the fields, so even if I write that argument or don't write it, it's fine. So we'll say result equals to search database query. Then we'll go through each result and display it to the user. We'll have a for loop for that. For count as 0, count is less than size of result, count plus plus. We'll echo result, that is the result that we have obtained, of count, that is the result number that we have obtained. Inside this result of count, I want the ID dot comma, that is the separator of the fields. That is, I will be separating ID, name, age, address, contact, and other information with the help of a comma. So I'll have ID, comma, result count name, comma, result count age, comma, result count address, comma, result count contact, comma, result count other information. This is a complete one record. That is, this is the entry of just one record from database. After this entry, I'll be having a separator. That separator in this case is EOR. So whenever I'll be getting this response on the Android device, I have to split it with the help of the EOR. Once you are done, then the code is finished. This small code actually does lots of things. That is, it splits all the records, or it separates all the records with the help of an EOR character, and it separates all the fields with the help of a comma character. The comma and the EOR are just given for reference. Whatever character you want in your application, you can split it with the help of that character. For example, the address might contain a comma. In that case, this code will not work. So you have to search for characters, those characters which don't frequently occur in a quick succession. For example, $, hash. Such a character will never occur in normal practice whenever someone is entering an input. So in your case, if you want a better program, you can separate the records with the help of a $, and you can separate all the fields with the help of @ plus. Okay, so this can be done by you, but for now, to keep things simple, we have separated all the fields by a comma and all the records by a EOR character. That was for the PHP part. Let's start with the Android application. We'll create a new project called as PHP demo, and we'll add the internet permissions to the manifest file because we want to access the internet. So we'll say users permission android.permission.internet. This can be done with the help of the GUI that we have already seen. Then let's make the layout to look like this. It is a relative layout because as you can see, the ID and the edit text are placed one after the other, while the ID and the name are placed one below the other. So this is a relative layout. We have txt ID, txt name, txt age, txt address, contact, and other information. We have btn delete, btn update, btn insert, and we have a list view to display the list of students called as LST students. So far so good. Let's move ahead with this. Inside the Java code, let's take the references of all the controls. So we have all the controls over here. We have taken the references of the controls, and we'll first, whenever some user enters into the application, he should be able to see all the records from the database. So we'll first select all the records. So we have to create a select records function. To that select records function, we are passing the list view. The select records function will do one job, that is, it will select all the records from database and it will fill all the records inside this list view LST students. Okay, so let's write the insert button handler. Inside the btn insert.set onClick listener, you will override the onClick method and you create an artificial get request. Now this is the first time when we are creating the artificial get request. So we will have the IP address 10.0.2.2. Don't mind this 85. Normally on your PCs this is not required, but in some cases when you will have a different server hosted at different places, this 85 will indicate the port number of the PHP code. In my case, in my PCs, I have kept the port number explicitly as 85. What you can do is you can change the port number depending upon your requirement. Normally this colon 85 is not required, but whenever you see colon some number, that indicates that the PHP code or the WAM server is hosted on the local machine at that port. So this is a virtual port, port number 85. This will access the local host. Inside the local host, I want the practice folder. Inside the practice folder, I want the MySQL demo folder. Inside the MySQL demo folder, I want the insert.php file. In the insert.php file, I will keep a question mark. Whenever you will be having a question mark, that indicates that you have a artificial get request. So we'll append the URL with txt name equals to, this is an artificial get variable, txt name equals to plus txt name dot get text dot toString. This txt name is the name of the control, dot get text is the text on the control, toString is the string on the control, plus and indicates that we want the second variable. The second variable is txt age. This txt age is again an artificial get variable which is not generated by the Android code, but we are making it explicitly. We'll say plus txt age dot get text dot toString. We'll have and txt address equals to txt address dot get text dot toString, and we'll have contact and we'll have the other information. So this is a very basic artificial get request that we have created. Then we'll execute the insert query by saying execute query URL. The execute query function has to be written by us. This execute query function will contain all the 5 classes that we have seen in the starting lecture, that is HTTP client, HTTP get, HTTP response, HTTP entity, and buffer reader, and it will get all the response from the PHP code and it will just toast that response to you at the output. Once we have inserted something in the database, we have to update that thing inside our application. To update that, we'll have the select records function, because whenever we have inserted a record, that record should be displayed on the list view of the application. So we'll be requiring a select records function for that. So far so good. We'll have the update button handler now. So we'll have btn update dot set onClick listener, new onClick listener. We'll override the onClick. We'll create the request again. But for the update request, I also want the ID. So I'll have the ID, then the name, age, address, contact, other information. You have to be aware that we are saying URL equals to URL plus. That is, whatever URL was over here, I am appending that URL with the help of some other text. So we have this URL plus txt ID equals to whatever ID we pass, plus and plus that URL again txt name equals to whatever name we pass, and so the URL now contains these three fields. Then we'll say URL equals to URL plus, so these three fields plus txt age plus txt address plus contact plus other information. Okay, then the next part is very easy. We have to just execute the query on the HTTP server and we'll select the records. So far so good. Let's see the delete button handler. We'll have delete button handler over here. So we'll have btn delete dot set on click listener, new on click listener. In the on click method, we have the URL wherein we have the txt id equals to whatever id we have. We'll execute the query and we'll select the records from the database. In the delete.php file, we only require one field, that was the ID. So we just have passed the ID from here. That will do the trick of deleting one record from the database. You have to appreciate the fact that over here we are performing the operation on the Android cell phone, and that operation is being performed on the PHP server. So all the devices which are using this application will be able to check out what is happening on the actual PHP server on their cell phones. Now whenever someone clicks on the list view, then we want whatever items we have on the list view should be updated or should be put on the form that we have at the top. Okay, so if I have 5 records in the list view and someone clicks on the third record, the complete information about that third record should be filled in the form that we have. So we'll say lst students.set on item click listener. So whenever someone clicks on the item, you have to first appreciate the fact that in our example, the list view contains all the items separated by a comma. So we'll first split them by a comma and then fill them onto the form. So we'll first take the text view from that, and this was arg1 was the view, but we don't want a view, we want a text view. So we converted that to a text view. From that text view, we'll get the text and convert that to a string. We'll get the result over here. From this result, we'll split that by a comma because in the PHP code we have separated the result by a comma. So we'll split it by a comma over here, and we'll set the fields of 0 as the ID, fields of 1 as name, fields of 2 as age, 3 as address, 4 as contact, and 5 as other information. So if the record was 1, A, B, C, D, E, 1 indicates the ID, A indicates the name, 3 indicates the age, C indicates the address, D indicates the contact, and E indicates the other information. Okay, so that is how the split function works. So far so good. So we have got the click listener for the list view. Whenever someone clicks on the item, that item will be filled on the form of the Android application. Let's see the select records function. Whenever someone calls the select records function and passes the list view, we have to fill all the information from the PHP server onto the list view. So for that, we'll be using the URL. The URL is perfectly fine. We have kept the URL at localhost, that is 10.0.2.2 at port number 85. In your PCs, you will not be having this port number 85 in most of the cases, but if you have the IIS server installed, that IIS server is normally on port 80. So to remove that port 80 from your PCs, you have to replace that port 80 by port 85. So you have to change the php.ini file and make the port number as port 85 over there. But that is quite advanced stuff. You will not be requiring it. But just for your knowledge, you have to just understand this. 85 indicates the port number. Then you have the inside the local host, you have the practice folder. Inside the practice folder, you have MySQL demo. Inside that, you have the select all.php file. The select all.php file will give you all the records separated by a EOR. So you have to first get the HTTP client, all those five steps that we had seen in the first slide. We'll get the HTTP client. We'll get the HTTP GET request. Inside the GET request, we'll pass the URL. Then we'll execute the GET request by saying HTTP, which is the client, dot execute. We have to execute in HTTP request. We have to execute the GET request. So we'll pass in the GET request variable. We'll get the response in the HTTP response object. We'll pass the response and we'll get the entity from the response. Getting the entity indicates getting the body of the application. The body of the application will be given to the HTTP entity. From this HTTP entity, we'll be reading all the content with the help of the buffered reader. So syntax for that is buffer reader br equals to new buffered reader, new input stream reader, HTTP entity.get content. So whatever content you will get from the entity, you will pass that content to a buffered reader through an input stream reader. The input stream reader will read and stream which is coming from the input. Okay, so whenever you will be having the HTTP response, that response will be giving you an input stream. You have to read that input stream with the help of the input stream reader, and the input stream reader will give you byte by byte information. But you don't want byte by byte, you want the complete response at once. So you will be using a buffered reader over here. Once you are done with that, you will say br.readline. br.readline will read the complete line that you will be passing from the PHP code. That line will be coming to the result. Now, that complete line has records separated by an EOR character. So you will check if the response was not null. If the response was not null, then we will split this in the form of an EOR character. So with the result.split EOR, we'll get all the results in the string array ARR students. Then our task is very easy. We have to simply say the LST records dot set adapter, new array adapter. This indicates the current application context. Android.r.layout.simple list item 1. This indicates we want the output in a simple list item form, comma, the source of data is ARR students. So whatever records you get, you split them with the help of an EOR character. That EOR character splitted records you enter in the list view. That was it for the select records function. Now just one function is remaining, that is the execute query function. In case there is an exception, we'll just toast that thing at the output that there was an exception. Now the execute query function will execute one query on the PHP server, and it will get the response and it will display that response at the output toast. So we have the execute query function. We'll have the URL over here. We'll get the HTTP client. We'll get the GET request. Inside the GET request, we'll pass the URL. Whatever URL we had over here for insert, update or delete, this will be passed over here. We'll pass that URL to the GET request. With that GET request, we'll get the response. That response will be obtained by saying HTTP, that is the HTTP client, dot execute the GET request. It will execute the GET request and give you the response in the HTTP response object. Now you will read that response by saying HTTP response dot get entity. This will give you the entity of the response. That entity should now be given to a buffered reader to read. We'll get the result by saying br.readline. Whatever result we get, the result can be inserted successfully or cannot insert database, updated successfully, cannot update database, deleted successfully or cannot delete from database. Okay, these were the echo commands that we did in the actual code over there. So we'll just toast this result and we'll catch the exception, and in case there was an exception, we'll just say ex.get message and toast that message at the output. So far so good. I hope this was clear to you. So let's revise. We had first created all the PHP functions, that was for insert, update, delete and select. Then we had created an Android application project. We had created the layout. Whenever someone clicked on the insert button, we had called the execute query function. The execute query function will execute that query on the PHP server, and it will get all the response from the PHP server, and it will toast that response at the output with the help of this toast. Then whenever someone inserted the record, that record had also be shown on the list view. For that we had the select records function. The select records function will select all the records from the database and split them with the help of the EOR character and display them at the output in the list view. Then we had the update handler, we had the delete handler. Those handlers were similar to the insert handler. Then we had created another function for the set on click listener or the set on item click listener for the list view. Whenever someone clicks on one of the items of the list view, we have to split that item with a comma and we have to fill the records of that item on the form. With that knowledge, let's do it and check out how does this work.